Redistricting Commission to order. Can the clerk please call the roll?
I'll take the roll. We'll start with Daisy Castro. I believe she's absent today. We'll move on to Caitlin Tran.
Present.
Thank you. Jonathan Bruns.
Here.
Lenka Wright.
Present.
BJ Fadum. Sylvia Alvarez.
Here.
Thank you. Freddie Sidbury. Andrew Ditlevson. Ramon Martinez.
Present.
And Adina Cardenas. I think she's absent. She said she would be late. And Teresa Alvarado.
Here.
Thank you.
We have 6 of 11, so that is a quorum.
Thank you, clerk. Okay, so is there a motion to approve the orders of the day?
I move.
Thank you, Sylvia. Is there a second?
Second, Ramon.
Ramon, thank you. Clerk, can you call the roll, please?
So I'll skip everyone who's absent. I didn't see anyone join. Caitlin Tran.
Aye.
Jonathan Bruns. Lenka Wright.
Aye.
BJ Fadum. He's absent, sorry. Sylvia Alvarez.
Present.
Oh, this is for orders of the day. Would you like to approve those? Sylvia?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. Freddie's not here. Neither is Andrew. Ramon? Yes? Okay.
I'm here, yes. Excuse me.
Okay, this is for orders of the day. You wanted to approve the orders of the day?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, and Teresa?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so item 2 on the agenda is public record. We have no public record, so we'll move on. Item 3 is the consent calendar. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the consent calendar?
I don't see any hands raised.
Great, thank you. Would any of the commissioners like to pull the item for discussion? Otherwise, we will move forward and accept a motion to approve.
I can make a motion.
I second.
Linka and Sylvia, I believe. Thank you. Clerk?
Okay, we'll start with Caitlin Tran.
Aye.
Jonathan Bruns. Lenka Wright.
Aye.
Sylvia Alvarez.
Aye.
Ramon Martinez.
Aye.
And Teresa.
Aye.
Oh, there's Andrew. Would you like to vote on the consent calendar?
Sure.
Okay. Is it a yes?
Aye, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good to
That
see you,
motion
Andrew.
passes.
Thank you. Okay, so item 4 is the public hearing. There is no public hearing tonight, so we will move on to new business. We have a couple of really interesting presentations organized by our consultants at Redistricting Partners, and we have 2 parts to our new business, and I'll just turn it over to Connie Malloy, who will introduce our speakers and the topics. Thank you for being here. Oh, you know what? One more thing. I just wanted to remind our commissioners, if you could stay on video, it would be really appreciated. Not only is it great for our speakers and our guests to know that we're here and engaged, but it's really important for the public to know that we're also engaged. Of course, if you have to run off for a moment and you can still hear us, you can turn off your video, but please return as soon as you can. Thank you. Connie?
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I'll just say a word on behalf of Redistricting Partners. I'm not a formal member of the Redistricting Partners staff team, but I have been partnering with them on training for a number of different local commissions, independent citizen redistricting commissions, mostly in California, although now we're working, doing some projects in Arizona and in New Mexico. By day, I run a charitable grant-making foundation, and my training is as an urban planner. But when the state did its first independent redistricting commission, I was one of the commissioners that was chosen to serve on that. And so now have this kind of odd moonlighting interest that is around just supporting other independent redistricting commissioners to get off to the best foot possible, and really thinking about what I wished I had heard more of as I was trying to wrap my head around the role and how I could best be of service. And so what we've lined up for you this evening is first a panel where we will bring in a couple of other seasoned retired commissioners, one who was from the local level in San Diego, another who was at the state level in California, and really having a conversation around what is the role of an independent redistricting commissioner, what were some of the things that they struggled with the most, lessons learned, really practical tips and examples, and an opportunity for you to be in dialogue with them. And then the second part will be a presentation around communities of interest, which I imagine you're all really eager to dive in on, both laying a foundation for some common definitions of communities of interest, examples of communities of interest that have come up in many different contexts, and also some advice on how do you really, as a body, create an environment where the vast majority of your communities will feel comfortable and empowered to have their voices heard within the redistricting process. And so really look forward to moving through these presentations and hope that they will be of service to the great work that you're doing. I know firsthand how hard this work is, and I just really salute you and appreciate you for the volunteer effort that this comprises. So we are your biggest fans. And even after this evening's presentation, I know that I speak for all of us that are coming to help train, glad to be a resource as you move through the months ahead. So with that, let me just share my screen and dive in. Okay, so the commissioner role. This is actually a picture of when I was chairing the commission. We had a rotating chair structure intentionally. And this was the day when we finalized our maps. And it was quite a journey to be able to get there. It was an exciting and exhausting milestone in our process. And so I just wanted to share this as a wonderful memory, and also just a reminder that you too will get to the finish line on what date, I'm not sure, but you will be different people from a personal and a professional perspective when you take this picture for yourself as a commission. And hopefully you get to take it in person versus on your Zoom screens. So our panel today, I told you a little bit about myself. I'll also be joined by Cynthia Dye, who was also a member of this past California Citizens Redistricting Commission, also one of the rotating chairs, and Carlos Marquez, who was a local level redistricting commissioner for the city of San Diego in their last redistricting cycle. I think after all of these years, it would be easier to say redistricting, but it's not. So as many of you may know, but I think it bears just reminding, the last cycle of redistricting for the state of California was the first time that we had had an independent commission at the state level. It was the first time that we would have a commission that was not allowed to look at issues of incumbency, to look at political parties, and where from having really redistricting been done behind closed doors, it was the opposite extreme in many ways. It was done completely out in public, everything live streamed and on the record. And in order to do the task, we had 14 people who were appointed to serve in this role. The structure that we had at the state level was 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and 4 independents, of which I was one. And our backgrounds were really varied. We came from a number of different regions across the state, very different professional backgrounds. The one thing that we had in common was that none of us had redistricting experience. We had quite an age spread. We had about a 40-year divide across the commission, from the oldest commissioner to the youngest commissioner. even though we all aged quite a bit in the process. And demographically, we're also, gladly, I think, as representative of a body as I think a group of Californians can be, given what a diverse state we actually have. I don't think any 14 people can fully capture California, but we did our best. So Carlos was a member of the commission in San Diego, and in the cycle in 2011, their commission had the job not just of redrawing the existing boundaries, but San Diego had grown quite a bit in that past decade. And so this commission had the charge of also determining what a whole new set of districts look like that added a new seat. San Diego is a city that has a long history of being a pioneer with independent redistricting. It's one that many other cities look to as, being first out the gate. And it's also worth knowing a little bit about the demographics of San Diego. At the time that Carlos was doing his work, there was also a number of different competing communities of interest that they had to reconcile. And one of the reasons that we wanted to make sure that he was part of this conversation today. The city had a historic and very strong African-American district. They also had a growing Latinx and Asian Pacific Islander community. And for those of you who know San Diego, it's also parts of the city have really strong LGBTQ presence and also political activism. It's historically been part of the state that is a sort of a feeder pool for state level representation and leadership from the LGBTQ community. And so this was all within the purview of what Carlos was dealing with. Now, it's worth saying that your commission has a challenge that we did not have in the 2011 cycle, which is we're kind of moving through this COVID era, with the expansion of access to vaccines, et cetera. Some of this is shifting and will continue to shift over the course of your months ahead. But I just wanted to name that because public process is so critical to the task at hand with redistricting. And so we think there's many lessons learned from our experiences that can certainly carry forward and be adapted, and also are going to bring in throughout the course of the evening some creative ideas around what is really emerging now as best practice around public engagement in this era that we are now in with the COVID backdrop. So with that, this is your chance to hear firsthand from some commissioners that I think are on the line. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite Cynthia and Carlos to go ahead and turn their videos on. Welcome. So Carlos and Cynthia, it's great to see both of you. And I just gave a little bit of background, but it would be great if everyone could just hear directly from you around what were your motivations to serve? Why did you want to be on an independent redistricting commission in the first place? And I'll kick it off with you, Cynthia.
Hello, commissioners. I tell a story about learning about gerrymandering in fifth grade social studies class, and just thinking, wow, that's so wrong. It's such a flaw in our democracy. And when the opportunity came to vote for the Voters First Act, I enthusiastically did it, thinking, why did it take 200 years to fix this? But I definitely wanted to be part of the solution. So that was part of my motivation to volunteer. And I had always been, kind of civically engaged, helping people register to vote. It was a natural next step for me.
How about you, Carlos?
Thanks, Connie. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. And I just want to also give kudos to the chair for having a very disciplined operating style for the meeting. That's great. It'll come in handy. So I was really motivated to join, to apply for appointment to the San Diego Redistricting Commission because I knew just having had my own lived experience, that the communities that I had grown up in were largely marginalized, traditionally did not have a seat at the table, and were largely not reflected in the redistricting and reapportionment process at any level of government. And so I felt really motivated to throw my hat in the ring, even though I was only 25 at the time, and which I thought surely would have meant that I was disqualifying myself. They were I was appointed and then ultimately became the vice chair. And I really tried to promote the lessons that I learned as an intersectional leader in the community at the time. I was an advocate at the time for the LGBT community. And so it was an interesting balancing act once I was on the commission to, ultimately find a way to represent everyone citywide, but also not lose sight of the values that really motivated me to apply in the first place.
So, Cynthia, what surprised you about being on the commission? You had these really noble intentions and imagination about what it would be like. What turned out differently?
Well, one of the first things that was a surprise, perhaps it shouldn't have been, but since we were part of the inaugural, commission, nobody had any idea what the time requirement was going to be. And I am one of the 6 small business owners that we had out of 14 on the commission. And I naively thought I would be able to continue my strategy consulting business and kind of do this redistricting on the side. And that just turned out to be really naive. And part of that was that at any point in time, we didn't even know like what part of the state we would be in. So I had a joke with my mom at some point. It's like, if you want to know where I am, just tune in on the internet and you'll see what city we're in. But, that was a problem for my clients. And I actually had to reluctantly understand that I was going to have to not take on new clients and just try to take care of the existing ones and kind of wind things down and really focus on the job of drawing fair maps for California. Which once I kind of got over that was, very rewarding. And, I continue to be very happy about my service, but it was a surprise. There was definitely very intense periods where we were working very long hours, particularly the month before the final maps. We were, sometimes working 12, 14-hour days.
Well, fortunately, in San Jose, you'll have a much more manageable geography than we did on the state commission. And so, Carlos, given that you were in really similar shoes to these commissioners here in San Jose, what surprised you from being a local level commissioner?
Well, I hope that you don't have the same experience exactly, because I think the thing that surprised me the most, as I said, because I was fairly young, is how political the process was from the jump. I thought I would be, maybe sort of given the benefit of the doubt. I thought we would all be given the benefit of the doubt. We had to spend a whole lot of our own time and energy, putting a number of maps together that reflected the growth of the city, and we were doing so as an act of service. But no one was really spared on the commission. But I was actually targeted first, and I believe most aggressively. And there were news reports about my partisan relationship with the Democratic Party and my former employment with the labor union. Questions about a number of things that were really tough and personal. It almost felt like somehow running for Congress, except I was on a local redistricting commission. But ultimately, I think that those of us who experienced that together on the commission, I think it really, fortified our it made us even more resolute to get the job done and to do it in a way that was above all the fray, right? And so we did. We all stuck together. You know, some commissions go through different fluctuations where people step off because they can't take the pressure. We did not. We stuck with it, and very proud of that.
So, you know, with the presentation that I understand that the commission received from Common Cause, you would have gotten a sense of the broader landscape and movement around independent redistricting reform. And I would love to hear Cynthia and then Carlos share a bit about, as you transitioned into this role, what did you see as some of the most important value or values that a commissioner and commissioner body needed to demonstrate? And what were the ways that you actually demonstrated that it wasn't just about making maps, but it was about a different type of process and ethos around how those maps were created?
Yeah, so one of the most important values was to kind of maintain a nonpartisan ethos. I think it will maybe will be perhaps less of an issue for you folks at the local level. We were clearly identified with a letter after our names, and we felt it was very important to convey that we were, you know, independent and nonpartisan. One of the ways we did this was by rotating our chair and vice chair positions, which was an innovation that the commission came up with on its own. It was not written in the California Constitution. What was written is that the chair and the vice chair had to be of different partisan affiliations. And we chose to take it one step further and rotate every major meeting. And that meant that at no one time did it look like any particular party was in control, because it would always rotate to somebody else, and the vice chair would always be of a different party. The other thing is, despite all of that, that we tried to speak with one voice, and that's we tried to make all of our decisions by consensus. And it might surprise you, given the makeup of the commission, that we rarely actually had to vote. We almost always made all of our decisions by consensus, and that was by defining consensus as everyone has had a chance to say their piece, and it's become evident what the will of the commission is. And people had a chance to put their statement on the public record, and then it's not necessary to vote because it's very clear, you know, where the majority of the commission was headed. So we only actually voted on votes we were required to take, for example, on the final maps. But whenever possible, we tried to act as a complete commission, moving forward, not meaning that we all agreed necessarily, but that we had discussed it and we were ready to move forward. Another important value was transparency. We were, you know, in the ultimate fishbowl, under a lot of scrutiny, as Carlos described. But it was really important that people heard our discussions out loud. It was actually illegal for us to receive communications about redistricting matters outside of a public meeting, and we were very careful about disclosing. When we had people try to approach us independently, we'd say, please make a public comment, or I'm going to have to disclose this interaction. And we are actually required as a commission to publish a report on justifying each of the districts we drew, all 177 of them. And so that, in addition to people, you know, for people who were following the commission and heard our discussions, that was great. But for, you know, average people, if they wanted to like learn, you know, 7 months later why we drew the district the way we did, they could read our justification of, you know, what we did, what the communities were that we tried to keep together in that particular district. And then the last value I'd like to talk about is about access. So the other half of transparency is providing access for people, public access. And we did a lot of things to make it easy for people to give public testimony. So You could do it by showing up at an in-person meeting, and we had a lot of public input hearings all over the state. You could show up at a regular business meeting and give your public comment. And if you were kind of shy or too busy, you could submit it by email. You could post it on the website. You could call our 800 number. You know, people would tweet at us during our meetings, and all of that was public comment. And I'm sure, you know, the next commission that's operating right now will have even more ways of communicating with the commission. People came, they gave us maps that were hand drawn. You know, they would put markers on Google Maps. Some people had access to sophisticated, the same GIS software that we use, and they would give us shape files, or they'd go to one of our technical assistance centers and work with the consultants to draw a map of their community. So we tried to accept input in all ways possible. We also allowed people to testify in the language that they were comfortable. So we had interpreters at some meetings where we knew we were going into areas where there was going to be another predominant language. Fortunately, among 14 people, we had people who could translate, even among the commissioners. So we took advantage of that when we didn't have a translator. And we posted all our materials in 6 languages and, you know, offered, you know, Google Translate on our website as well. So all of these are important considerations. San Jose has a lot of ethnic minorities and language minorities, so that's something for you guys to think about too.
Absolutely. And Carlos, what would you add, coming again from the local perspective?
Well, first, I do think your commission is incredibly diverse, and that's a huge accomplishment because it's not always like that, no matter how, you know, a local municipality might endeavor to try. There's only so much you can do with the pool you have, but it's great to see, you know, the sort of diversity of the city reflected. I think that equity was really core to my, you know, it was an organizing principle for me because, as I said, what motivated me to be on the commission in the first place is sort of trying to provide voice to perhaps folks who were not showing up in public comment, and trying to, you know, really ask the question about who isn't reflected in the debate, rather than necessarily skewing our perspective towards folks who absolutely were reflected, but who perhaps are always reflected in these decisions. So equity was really core to the work that I was trying to do. And I recognize that, you know, it's different from putting your thumb on the scale per se, or personalizing the work, or making it partisan. I think equity is very different from that, but I recognize that the line can be quite blurred, at least for the observers who will be watching the work that you do. But I don't think it's a reason to shy away from making sure that you share your own personal stories and experiences, and it doesn't just have to be around a gender or racial or ethnic minority experience. It could be about your experience in a neighborhood that has, you know, a lot of historicity, or you know, your experience in a neighborhood that's right next to the airport, and why that neighborhood needs to be intact. I think it's important to bring your full self to the job. The other piece is just, and as we were talking in advance about values, I had identified accountability and independence, but upon further reflection, I think that actually it's only one value, which is integrity. And it's really kind of the combination of independence and accountability, because I had to hold myself accountable, keeping myself honest about where my own biases existed, and making sure that I was engaging in even more active listening from folks who would show up that I knew I probably didn't agree with in my own personal world, but for whom it was my absolute responsibility to take every voice seriously. And then integrity in terms of also demonstrating a level of independence from the political process. I was an advocate before I was on the commission and during, actually. So I had access to a number of politicians who wanted to, have these sidebar conversations, and needed to resist those and ensure that people had to organize in the hearings just as much as someone who didn't have political influence. So integrity, I think, is the other value that I would emphasize.
Great. So let's get into public engagement, and we'll be continuing that throughout the rest of the evening. And as I shared in those opening slides, granted, we are in a different era, both in terms of technology has evolved in the recent years since we were doing our redistricting work. And we're also in this moment around COVID. And so would love to hear some thoughts around what were some of the public engagement best practices, in addition to what you've already shared, that you would recommend, and also things that you're just seeing now. I know both Carlos and Cynthia, you were actively involved in your communities in various ways. And so, what of those lenses can you also bring to their task at hand?
Yeah, so I would look at what California did around census outreach and try to replicate that. Speaking to kind of what Carlos said, there are definitely communities that are underserved, and they are not going to show up at your public input hearings, and they're not going to bring their maps. And so, how can you make sure to get their voices represented? So one thing the census did is really engage with, grass tops leaders and community-based organizations to make sure that that they could represent a lot of these communities that are, not going to show up to a government hearing. The educational effort is important too, because I experienced this, at the state level. I of course was deployed as a outreach person for the AAPI community, and I found myself on a Chinese drive time radio talk show. It served the San Francisco Bay Area, so someone might have heard me on this show perhaps. And it was it's a show designed for immigrants. So these are people who work in the Bay Area and speak English, but they prefer Chinese in terms of how they consume their media. And of course, my Mandarin is not as fluent as someone who who maybe was not, who was born elsewhere, but as a second generation American, I understand Chinese, I speak some, and so they put me on this radio show. And so I worked out this deal with the host where he would ask me the question in Chinese, but I would answer in English. And I was answering really basic questions like, what does Congress do? Because to understand why redistricting is important, you have to understand, why you want to influence these representatives, right? And so those were things that I could not explain in Chinese. So this is why I got dispensation to answer in English. And, a lot of it was just getting in my case, the API community to care, particularly ones, who had not been Americanized. And I was, improving my pitch as I went to different organizations to speak. And I finally said, don't you want your kids to go to Berkeley or Stanford? Then this is why you should care about redistricting, because redistricting brings more resources to your community, ensures that you have good public schools, which will allow your kids to get into the colleges and universities of their choice and get that, steady job that you want them to get. But, you have to think about what is the pitch that will get different communities to care. because you guaranteed you'll have more people show up at a public hearing about moving a bus stop than to one about redistricting, because it's just kind of obscure and you have to tie it to their day-to-day lives and the values, that things that they care about. One other thought is piggybacking off the census. I wanted to make sure to share this story. I did a pro bono project for Catholic Charities of Santa Clara County. And I know that they were handing out information about the census in their food distribution to, again, try to get to people who normally would not necessarily be that politically engaged, and, you know, make sure they knew about the census and how to fill it in. And they had people there helping them. So, you know, think about how to piggyback off of current outreach efforts to try to educate people about redistricting and how people can give input and why it's important for them to speak up about their communities.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And from my understanding, there was a lot of robust effort, both from the community-based organization side and also from the city and your government representatives. So you have an amazing resource right there with your team at the city to think about how do you build off of those networks and those entities that already have done some education and engagement around census, that then there can be some education, another layer of, okay, what do we do with that data? We had you fill out this form, and then the purpose of that form, the next layer of that is to be able to do maps. And so that's something that we're seeing a lot in the nonprofit community, that organizations that have been on the census are now really trying to pivot and be engaged in the next step of the process. Carlos, what would you like to add on public engagement?
I love the idea of really leveraging the infrastructure that some of our most cherished community-based organizations laid in terms of groundwork around the census for the purpose of redistricting. It should always be that way because it's the natural extension of the work that we have to do every 10 years. But I guess I would say, you know, don't be afraid to be an ambassador in your community and be the human face of, you know, what can sometimes be like a fairly, you know, technocratic and opaque process. Not everyone trusts government, and that's probably true on both the right and the left. And so you all are really able to break down why redistricting is important in practical terms. You are also able to put a face on why the work is important. And I also just think that the budget that you ultimately adopt for doing the outreach is really important as well. Because if you don't adopt the right budget, then you really are really kind of limiting what you actually can do in terms of robust public outreach. So the old adage that, you know, personnel is policy, you know, I think budget is policy. And I think it's important to think creatively about how you can leverage your limited resources in service of reaching those who otherwise might not know about the opportunity to get involved. And then the final thing I would say is I do think we've largely talked about the pandemic era as a limiting factor when it comes to engaging in robust public engagement, access, participation, but it also there might be a silver lining there because, you know, if you engage on digital channels, both through earned and paid media, you could, you know, potentially get more eyeballs involved in this process than if you were in a physical location with all the barriers that might come with showing up at a hearing.
In this early phase, before you have census data to work with, of course, you're going to be engaging the public, and this is really prime time for doing some of that educational work. One of the things that made it easier for those of us who've been commissioners to get out in the community and talk about redistricting was just having a set of shared talking points so that we were all on message, and it didn't matter what our kind of individual perspectives or party affiliation or neighborhood, et cetera, was. we had really a joint set of information that we wanted to share as we went out into the community, so that we were able to just make sure there was sort of a consistent understanding in how it was presented. And it was much less intimidating. And if there is on your commission, if you do have commissioners who have specific language capacity, it's also an area where there can be some collaboration. I know we had a few of us on the California Commission who were able to handle the Spanish media inquiries and a lot of the Spanish community presentations. Similarly, we just took the same talking points that we had on the English side, and then we were able to adapt them for using with the Spanish communities. And that therefore it made the lift lighter, because again, we know you're all volunteers, you have other things that you're trying to do as well. So the more that you're able to streamline, it's really helps to not be a barrier for someone getting out in the community. So I'll just ask one last question and then open it up for questions on your end. The next presentation will be about communities of interest, and you could take any 5 people from the same community and hear something a bit different in terms of how they perceive their community, what they might want the maps to look like in that community. And so I'd love if you could share some perspectives or advice around what it is like to hear all these different points of view and to actually play your role as commissioner in trying to reconcile all these different experiences that we have as humans and as citizens of a city. Carlos, may I start with you this time?
Well, I don't take self-care for granted. That's really important. Obviously, you want to make sure that, and these meetings can be really long. So preparing for, maintaining your endurance throughout the meeting, because as active a listener as you can be and as present as you can be, the fairer the process will be, the more reflective the process will be of, the people who spend their limited time participating in this process, when very well that they could be with their families as well. But it is tough to try to kind of distill down into a map the very sort of vibrant and diverse set of constituencies that you have to consider. So it certainly wasn't easy. I think one of the benefits we had in San Diego is that because the city had gone through one redistricting cycle in 2000, I think that the communities that had something to lose, particularly the ethnic and racial minorities and the LGBT community, they decided that they were going to actually come up with an organizing structure, a committee of their own. That was called and they called their map the Unity Map, and they were basically proposing that the African American district, which was a historical district that no longer had the robust numbers that used to have, and perhaps was on the bubble in terms of even being able to justify the preservation of those lines. They came together with the Latino community, who wanted a second empowerment district because they had grown that significantly. The API community didn't have a lot of representation. They wanted their first district, and the LGBT community wanted to preserve the boundaries they had. So they came together and they advocated together. And I thought that was a really smart strategy, because otherwise, you do have to make hard trade-offs. But I also think that communities of interest obviously are not the only element that you have to consider here. Equally important is the district compact. Does it meet contiguity standards? What is the standard of deviation? So in some ways, even if you want to maximize what the communities of interest desire in order for different communities to be able to meet their full political aspirations, frankly, you also have to balance all of that against the actual kind of operational work of making sure that these districts geographically make sense. And sometimes that actually has a little bit of a tempering effect on what you actually can achieve when it comes to doing innovative things on the community of interest side. So you have to really look at everything on balance. But if you have a number of different diverse constituencies in San Jose who are coming at this process in a splintered manner, I certainly would encourage a more unified approach, because it at least the groups are making decisions about trade-offs together and authentically amongst one another, rather than a group of commissioners who may not all be from those communities.
Great. We certainly got our fair share of community of interest testimony as well on the state commission. And what advice would you have, Cynthia?
Yeah, so we had a similar experience where we actually had to suggest, this happened in the South Bay area of Los Angeles, where we were presented with conflicting maps. For the Latinx community presented one map, the African American community presented another map, and the AAPI community presented another map. And we basically said, we're going to have to split this baby. Or maybe you could talk to each other and come back to us. And, it was kind of like, nope. And, they went away. And the next day they came back to us with a unity map, and they had worked out a compromise, and that they were all happy with, and it made our jobs a heck of a lot easier. So that is, if they don't organize on their own, like apparently they did in San Diego, then you can often suggest it. But our experience at the state level is that we found that in many cases, the communities were actually quite small and easy to keep intact. We just had to know where they were. So, capturing the borders is really important. And finding out who else, what other communities, nearby communities that they share similar values and interests with, so that they should be grouped together in a single district. So finding kind of the affinity groups, and also the ones that they shouldn't be grouped with and maybe should be in a separate district. And in some cases, you're just not going to be able to do anything about it. You're going to have to split it because, for example, when we were drawing the South Bay, we had the South Asian district, the South Asian community, which is massive, of course, in the Bay Area. And there was just no way we were going to be able to contain them in a single assembly district or whatever. We were able to actually draw them into a single Senate district, but which is much larger. So you're going to have similar situations where the community is just too large and you're going to have to split them. And then you can ask them, where would a judicious split be? If you're going to have to split it because the community is too large, is it going to be down a freeway? Is there a natural border like mountains or a river, right, where there's a natural boundary, and get input from the community on where the line should be drawn if there's going to have to be a line drawn. In some cases, you're going to get conflicting testimony about different communities of interest, and they overlap, and it's just not going to be, you're not going to be able to make everyone happy, right? And in some cases, you may actually decide that a certain community should be elevated above others. We actually made that decision in San Jose for the Vietnamese community. We heard testimony about the Evergreen neighborhood and Little Saigon and how it had been split over and over again, multiple times, into 4 districts and into congressional districts and at the state legislative districts as well. And it just historically, they had just been, diffused of their power over and over again in redistricting. And so we, as a commission, decided to right that wrong, and we chose to keep the Vietnamese community together. And of course, that meant that there were some other things that had to give, right? So you are going to make some trade-offs, and the important thing is to be transparent about why, and to just be really clear about the rationale behind your decision, and your recognition that you may be splitting some other communities, and here's why you chose to make this kind of trade-off. And some of it may be based on the boundaries of San Jose, right? So they're going to be border conditions, because if a community is close to the border, you know, there are certain constraints on how you can draw that district, right?
Yeah. One thing just to add to that is that, you know, next month our presentation will be really into the nitty gritty around legally, what are you required to do as a commission in terms of federal law, state law, you know, the Voting Rights Act, et cetera. When we're talking about communities of interest, it's really an area in which you as a commission have a lot of latitude and discretion around the testimony that you hear and how to apply it. And, you know, it can be actually for me, it was a bit more anxiety provoking to not have clarity on exactly what you do or don't do in terms of communities of interest, right? It feels squishier, for lack of a better word or more technical word. But what I would say there is, you know, imagine across the whole state of California, all the different layers of community of interest testimony that we got, so much of which we had to reconcile and much of it that was conflicting. We dealt with 7 different lawsuits in regards to the maps that we drew. And we won all 7 cases. And we won the cases not because our maps were necessarily the be all end all. I wish I could say that we did absolutely everything perfect, but time and time again, what we heard from the judges that were presiding over the cases was that there had been an integrity to the process. There had been transparency and clarity around why we made the decisions that we did, and that all of that was documented through our public process. And so it was, you know, that I think is something to keep in mind around, you know, from a values and from a practice perspective. That is really at the core of why we have these independent redistricting commissions. So I will just open it up and invite, if any of you have questions for Carlos or Cynthia, please feel free.
Why don't we have folks raise their hand? That way we can make sure folks are in order. And if we don't have any questions, yes, Linka.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Connie, for bringing Cynthia and Carlos to us. Really appreciate them taking time out of their busy schedules to share their insights for us. So the question I have, it's somewhat subjective, but it's for both Cynthia and Carlos. How did you know your commission got redistricting right? And I'm using the term right loosely. You know, what was an indicator for you? Let's start with Carlos.
Well, you know, it's actually, it's a time-tested question, to be honest, because, and it also depends on what the definition of right actually is. And I don't mean that in a Clintonian, like what is. I mean, like, really, like, what are your objectives, right? And we kind of, I think that we got it right because it was on time, it was under budget, and we ultimately were able to meet the, you know, the needs and the aspirations of the most marginalized San Diegans, and also kept the integrity of communities like the coastal community. As I said, there was a community that was really surrounding the airport, and they felt like they needed to consolidate their political power so that they could ultimately be able to temper the expansion of the airport if they needed to, and really talk about the quality of life issues involved with planes flying over them, right? Would have been a lot harder if they were divided, that type of thing. But I think the ultimate test was, when we looked at how the composition of the city council ultimately looked over the last decade, it took a while because there was, for the second Latino Empowerment District anyway, there was a white female incumbent who was in the position. Wonderful lady, wonderful public servant. But the community felt really strongly that they'd never been able to elect their own in that region, and so she finally retired 4 years into the map. 4 years into the map. And so 4 years into the map, the community elected a Latino woman to represent them for the first time ever. And the API district elected an API, and so on and so forth. And so, not that ethnic and racial identity is everything, but I also think that the partisan spread was interesting in San Diego, because both parties cried afoul about whether we were putting our thumb on the scale for one or the other. And at the end of the day, depending on whether it was an even year or an off year, like a presidential year or a midterm year, that's really what dictated whether Republicans and Democrats were able to get elected to two swing districts ultimately. And so, and they fluctuated throughout the last 10 years. And so that suggests to me that it was based on who was better organized and not based on the boundaries that we drew. So I felt really good about that. But you don't always know in the immediate aftermath whether your map did the job. But I also will say that perhaps one of the most important indicators early is that it survives litigation. So, and where ours did.
Yeah, ditto on ours. So as Connie said, we've survived seven lawsuits, and the ones that were map specific, they were all unanimous decisions by the California Supreme Court. I take it as a point of pride that we were not sued by any advocacy groups, and we were threatened. MALDEF in particular threatened us, and they wanted more, Latino empowerment districts, and we drew the number that we felt was justified, and it was less than they wanted, but they looked at the map nationwide and they decided to sue Texas instead. So we think they made the right decision. And also, of course, the 2010, CRC's maps have been studied by academics up and down, everywhere. On every metric, we improve the maps in terms of, fewer splits, more VRA districts, more compact, more competitive, even though competitiveness was not one of our criteria. They've turned out to be more competitive, and probably more important, more responsive. Michael Lee at the Brennan Center actually made that comment that California has one of the most responsive maps in the nation. And that means that it's exactly what Carlos was talking about. The districts will flip if the electorate changes underneath. And that means it hasn't been gerrymandered. So if the electorate chooses somebody else, the district will flip. And you remember the last election, there were 7 districts that nobody knew what the outcome was because it was so close. So, and those, districts were not drawn with any partisan considerations. They were drawn based on the rank ordered criteria that we were given. And again, the report that we wrote at the end, it showed how we fulfilled each of the rank ordered criteria in sequence, in order.
The last thing I would add is on the public polling front, there are entities that I can't remember, was it a PPIC study, Cynthia, maybe you could help me remember, but they did a survey to ask public opinion once
it was a Gallup poll, I think.
Was it Gallup?
Yeah.
And sadly, there was only like a third of Californians that even knew that there was a redistricting commission doing the work. But of the people who knew about the redistricting commission, 2/3 approved of the work that we had done, which, you know, to be honest, I think we were even a bit surprised by, because it felt like when we were doing the job that there was no way we could make everybody happy or even half the people happy. So to have, you know, 2/3 of folks who were following the process feel like we had acted in the public interest felt like a huge accomplishment. And so, you know, that's why I think we all are so invested in your success as a commission here in San Jose, really trying to be a thought partner where appropriate for the other, both state level and local commissions all up and down.
I was going to say the candidates also, you know, the elected officials actually approve of the process too. And the legislature actually stepped in to, you know, help amend the Constitution to deal with the census delays this year. And they kind of did that on their own. So, so even the legislature, who, you know, of course, greatly wanted to see us fail since they had been fired from the job, actually have ended up being supporters of the process. It gets them off the hook, right?
Yeah,
They're like,
no,
we didn't gerrymander, blame the commission.
Yep. Well, I
Any
don't
other
see-
last questions?
Yeah, I would, a couple things. One, thank you all so much. I mean, just the process that you went through, all of you, it sounds so harrowing, and you guys were really blazing a trail, that, and the fact that you're continuing to serve by making yourselves available as a resource is like incredible. So thank you so much. I really, a couple of things that jumped out at me is that you also said at the state commission, I'm assuming this was true at the city of San Diego as well, that you had people that didn't have any prior experience in anything like this, which is also, I think, very comforting. It's just normal folks, right, from the community, which is really cool. Actually, I've commented on that about our commission here. It's really nice that it's not, you know, stacked with a bunch of insiders necessarily. It's just folks who care about the community. And so that was really nice. I was also struck that you said that the decisions were made by consensus. And I can totally see how through this process with, you know, all of the data that you're going to be getting and all the advocacy you're going to be hearing, that as a committee, you formed a bond, and, you know, you were approaching your work with the integrity that I think your colleagues respected, and you didn't add that, nobody added to the drama. There was plenty of drama, I'm sure, being presented to you. So I think that's really cool, and that makes me feel hopeful. So I do have two questions that I would love for you guys to respond to. One is, you know, at the city level, we have districts in San Jose, and people, those districts have strong identities as they currently exist. So I'd love your thoughts about how much we should be thinking. I've tried to keep folks from talking about what district they're from and talk more about what neighborhood they're from. But if you could help us think about, like, you know, shedding that kind of construct, that's one question. And then another question is, because of the census data, we have a lengthy delay between now and when we get the data, which can be a huge benefit. You know, we have an opportunity to do a lot of good outreach, but by the time we get the data, it's going to be a quick turnaround. So I'd love your reflections on both of those questions, please.
So Carlos, do you want to talk about the district identity thing? For California, we just started with a blank slate. We knew that there was a bipartisan gerrymander, and there was just nothing we could do to start with existing districts. So we just started with a blank slate.
Yeah, well, I mean, we I think overhauled the lines and from the previous map, but that was largely dictated on just the fact that there were growth patterns that we needed to take into consideration, and a loss of growth. And so you know, we couldn't deviate too much between one district and the next in terms of how many actual people were in any given district. So if a district had grown by 5 or 10%, the existing lines were totally indefensible, because and that's what this process is for, right? To make each district more representational, and that each district have equal representation in terms of numbers, right? So I thought that that basing the boundaries on where the city was growing the most as a first kind of first draft was helpful, just to kind of see from a data-driven perspective, you know, what does the math dictate? I thought that was actually a really helpful objective indicator. And then you have to overlay everything else, because everything else is equally important. But it also sets, I think, the table for you about what's achievable.
And then on the second question, you know, as you may recall, the 2010 California Citizens Redistricting Commission had a ridiculous schedule because it took them 18 months just to choose us. And then, you know, we had 8 months to do the job, and then the people passed the Voters First Act for Congress and tacked on congressional districts and gave us 1 month left. So we had like 7 months to do the entire thing. So it was just nuts. Plus start a government agency that normally takes a year to establish. So we just had this breakneck speed through the whole thing. And it was also, you know, there was this part at the end that was really compressed, which was the, you know, the time, you know, between the draft maps and the final maps. You know, we're just working all the time because we had to get it right, and we had an absolute final deadline. The new 2020 CRC is facing exactly the same situation you are, where they're waiting for the census data, and this is going to be this extended process, and then they're going to have to just jam everything through at the end when they get the census data. So, you know, what we've recommended to them is just to do a really good job of capturing all the community of interest data, you know, map that all out, get that all ready to go. You can use census estimates, you know, the 2019 American Community Survey. So there are pretty good census estimates for California that you ought to be able to use, just to give you an idea of what the districts are going to look like. And then when the actual data comes in, just overlay it and tweak it.
One dynamic that we found when after we released our draft maps was that the level of specificity of the input that we got changed dramatically. And it didn't matter how, you know, we had a template, and we encourage people to talk about, you know, boundaries, street names, etc. Once there's actually a map, the whole exercise goes from conceptual to concrete. And so being prepared and mapping out your public process in a way that you know it's going to be a marathon at the end. There's really no way around it. But the quality of the feedback that you're going to get from the public when they have something to respond to is going to be dramatically more actionable than some of the feedback that you'll get in the early stages. And so just to encourage you, I mean, you know, those of us who served on the last CRC have been trying not to meddle too much, but this is one area that, you know, is really critical, because just because you're tight on time doesn't mean, well, then we're not going to do public process at the end, because that's actually when you get to the heart and soul of what the redistricting is. So really encourage you to, you know, look at your calendar and figure out what is actually doable and ambitious in order to really protect that intent around a strong public process.
And I'd recommend you get a draft map out as quickly as possible, because people just, as Connie said, it's very hard for people to respond to something conceptual. When you actually have lines on a map, oh, you know, we got so many tomatoes thrown at us after our first draft map. So much so, and such a volume of very specific actionable input, that we actually decided not to do a second draft map. We had planned to do 2 draft maps, and we just realized you know, our brains were full, and we wanted to take the time to honor the input that we had received to make really good final maps based on that. So that was something we had to improvise because we just realized we couldn't survive another round of really specific feedback and have the time to incorporate it into the final maps. And we wanted people to see that the input they gave us was incorporated in the final maps.
Well, great. Thank you so much. We have to open it up for public comment if we don't have any other comments or questions from commissioners. So why don't we do that? And if commissioners have questions, we can always come back. Staff, are there any members of the public who'd like to speak on this?
There are no hands raised.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, wait,
Oh.
the hand just went up for Carol Watts.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi,
Good
welcome.
evening.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. My name is Carol Watts, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of San Jose, Santa Clara. And we thank each of you for committing your valuable time and energy to serve on this redistricting commission. As you know, you've got a very important task to redraw these maps and to follow the requirements of the acts and prioritize keeping the communities in order. I'm sorry, you just changed my screen. Okay. To keep the communities of interest whole, to achieve the more public input from all the communities, including those who are not often heard. We applaud your desire to do education and outreach to identify these community concerns and needs. And we're pleased to hear that I'm sure you're going to schedule public meetings held at different times during the day so that the people can engage and have a voice on how these districts are drawn. As you've already heard tonight, redistricting requires making choices among competing interests, which might open the door to manipulation. So applying criteria that are ranked in order of priority minimizes the opportunities for abuse and helps to promote a process that will result in a more representative democracy. So thank you for considering this ranking of priorities now. One other resource, which you may or may not have heard of already, is from the Brennan Center for Justice, titled Creating Strong Rules for Drawing Maps. We applaud your work, and we urge you to continue working with notable groups like Common Cause, the Advancement Project of California, and the Redistricting Partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any others?
There are no other speakers.
Any other commissioner questions? If not, I'm sure I can speak for you and thank our panelists for joining us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
And I know that as we go through this process, it's nice to know that you're there.
Likewise, likewise. Well, so this is a natural transition point. Dr. Dobard, who's our next presenter, he's already on the line, but if you'd like to take a break and stretch, go to the restroom, we could do that now and then come back for part two.
Sure. And Carlos, I don't know if you're dropping off, but please give my regards to my friend Nora Vargas.
Oh, I'm happy to.
Okay, we'll just take a couple minute break.
Thank you. Take care.
I'll hand it over to you, Connie.
All right, sounds good. I will be very brief because we have someone here who can speak to communities of interest in a lot of depth, which I know you were really eager to do tonight. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. John Dobard. He is the Director of Political Voice at a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization called Advancement Project California. If you're not aware of them, look them up. They do amazing work. In particular, Dr. Dobard's role is eliminating disparities around government responsiveness and public participation, which really gets at the heart of the matter when it comes to redistricting. And so in his presentation, he'll share some fundamental concepts around communities of interest, building on what we just discussed with the commissioners, and also get into more of the best practices of how you actually go out into community and solicit the right type of testimony that you need to be able to do your job well. So with that, I'll pass it to Dr. Dobard. He'll pull up some slides and walk you through a presentation, and then feel free. We'll also do another question and answer session afterwards before we close out.
Great. Thank you, Connie. And good evening, Commissioners. Again, my name is John Dobard, and I direct the Political Voice program at Advancement Project California, which is a racial justice organization that works alongside community partners across the state to transform public institutions and shift public investments to achieve racial equity. We do this work primarily through policy advocacy and research on 3 issues. One is education, another is public investments in communities, and a third is democracy. And our democracy work is housed in a program area that we call Political Voice, and that's the program area that I lead. Political Voice works on a range of issues that include public participation in governance, voting and election systems, government responsiveness to racial inequity, the census, and redistricting. And when it comes to redistricting, we're currently involved in 3 different coalitions, separately focused on the state's redistricting commission process and LA County's inaugural commission process. Our work here essentially boils down to 3 roles. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm trying to change these slides. I was having issues changing the slides. Our work on redistricting essentially boils down, as I said, to 3 roles. We're a convener, and we convene one of the 3 coalitions I just mentioned, and we're a co-convener of another coalition. Additionally, in collaboration with other organizations, we monitor commission processes and advocate when and where necessary. And finally, building off of work that Advancement Project California did during the 2011 redistricting cycle, we provide support to community organizations and community residents on data and mapping. Tonight, I'll be speaking to you about best practices when it comes to public engagement and understanding communities of interest. I'll talk about things you'll want to consider when it comes to meeting structure, resources, and outreach. But I'm going to begin by saying a little bit about what communities of interest, or also referred to as COI, what a community of interest is. So according to San Jose's city charter, the council may consider communities of interest in establishing boundaries for council districts. However, the charter does not define what such communities are. And so a good place to start to get a sense of how to define it, or how to define that concept for redistricting purposes, is the state's election code. That code provides a definition for both general law cities and charter cities. According to that definition, a community of interest is a population that shares social or economic interests that should be included within a single district for purposes of its effective and fair representation. One aspect of defining communities of interest or a community of interest that is not included in this definition is geography. It's generally taken for granted that a community of interest is geographically connected. So a COI, is a community that shares interests, yes, and shares geography. So it's both interest and geography. At the same time as it provides a definition for COI or for what a COI is, the state's definition also includes some indication of what a COI is not. And so, according to the state, communities of interest do not include relationships to political parties, incumbents, or political candidates. So when you're considering how to understand a community of interest or considering what communities of interest to include in your maps, those shouldn't be communities that are bound together or tied together by political party affiliation, or based on their relationship to a particular council member, or based on their relationship to an aspiring council member. Now, all of this is fairly straightforward. A COI comprises a group of people who share social and economic interests and geography, but that's still pretty vague. So to try to make it more concrete, I want to provide a few examples. So here are some examples of what shared social and economic interests might look like. You might have a group of folks who frequent similar business centers, and so they're bound together by certain consumer practices. You might have folks who share cultural centers and holidays, or that share ancestry and or language within a particular geography, or that have children that attend similar schools from elementary up through middle school and high school. Or you might have folks who live in close proximity to environmental hazards. Finally, you might have folks who share access or lack of access to certain goods, services, and resources. So those are just a few examples. So now you have a sense of what a community of interest is. Now, how should you determine what those communities are within your city? The best source of information will be the people, your city's residents. You should rely heavily on them to tell you what their communities are. And to get the most useful information in the most efficient way, you'll need to have an effective public engagement process, which is what I'll turn to talking about now. I'm going to start with what I think should be a core principle, if not the core principle that guides your approach to public engagement and the collection of COI testimony. And just a forewarning, a lot of what I'm about to say is going to echo what both Cynthia and Carlos said. So there's going to be a lot of overlap. So in the interest of time, I'll try to move fairly quickly and not spend too much time on some of those things that I think have already been said. So the principle that I want to turn your attention to is the principle of equitable access. And this principle has two parts. One part is accessibility, and that's about developing policies and practices for gathering COI information that make it easy for all San Jose residents to participate in your process. The other part is equity, and that's about acknowledging and responding effectively to the unique barriers that hinder participation by certain populations. Both parts of this principle are important, but I want to stress the part about equity. And the reason for this is that certain disparities tend to be prevalent when it comes to public participation in political processes, such as the process that you'll be developing. For example, and this is what I'm most familiar with given the work that I do and the type of organization that Advancement Project California is, data consistently show racial and socioeconomic disparities in political participation at the national and state level. By political participation, yes, I'm referring to voting, but I'm also referring to activities beyond voting, such as contacting public officials, contributing time and or money to campaigns, and attending public meetings. We know that people of color tend to participate at lower rates than their white counterparts. We also know that across racial and ethnic groups, people with higher levels of education and income tend to participate at higher rates than their counterparts with lower levels of education and income. And these disparities seem to be mirrored in San Jose. So for example, in the last general election, whites voted at higher rates than both Asian and Latinx or Latino residents. And this is a trend that can be traced back through general and primary elections, at least to the 2016 primary election, if not further. Similarly, in the 2010 census, and we don't have the 2010 data yet, white residents had the highest rate of participation compared to residents of color. The explanatory factors for particular disparities in participation vary, but there are some factors that recur again and again in research, and none of them are about apathy. I want to make that clear. Instead, they're about barriers or things that hinder or get in the way of people being able to participate. And some common barriers related to racial and socioeconomic disparities are actually some things that we've already heard tonight. Trust in government institutions, and this is something that we're hearing a lot about now with the vaccine rollout. Language, the timing, location, and format of opportunities to participate. Fewer social networks that mobilize people into politics. Fewer opportunities to develop civic knowledge and civic skills. In other words, fewer opportunities to understand our various government processes and how to effectively engage in those processes. And finally, lower levels of internal political efficacy. In other words, lower levels of feeling as though you understand politics. So these are some common barriers that we see come up again and again in research on disparity, racial and socioeconomic disparities in political participation. I've highlighted people of color and people with lower levels of income and education as demographic groups that tend to face barriers to political participation. Can any commissioners quickly name some other populations that face unique barriers? Just want to quickly go off mute and throw out some names of some other populations that might face unique barriers.
Differently abled.
Yep. Any others?
Undocumented communities.
Yep. One more, anyone want to throw out one more? No?
A religious minority?
Yep. Those are certainly groups that might face unique barriers, or that are likely to face unique barriers when it comes to public participation. In addition to those groups, I'll just mention youth, seniors, LGBTQ residents, and that was mentioned, that population was mentioned earlier. So as you think about how to structure your process for gathering COI information, start from the reality of disparities in political participation and put the principle of equitable access at the heart of your thinking. Now I want to look at how you might apply that principle to the context of meeting structure, resources, and outreach. And I want to note before I proceed that you're going to see some things on slides that I'm not going to address, and that's going to be intentional because I want to make sure you have these things for future reference, but I also want to be very mindful of time. So with respect to structure, I want to start with the number of meetings you hold to gather information. Your city charter requires that you hold at least 3 public meetings in various places before submitting your recommendations to the council. I recommend that you strongly consider going beyond the minimum requirement of 3 meetings, and this has to do primarily with San Jose's demographics. You're a city of 1 million residents. Additionally, at nearly 72%, the overwhelming majority of residents are people of color and or Latinx or Latino descent. approximately 40% of your residents are foreign born. 57% of people 5 years and older speak a language other than English at home. And you have a sizable portion of your population that are renters or that are renters. So these demographics suggest that many city residents are likely to face some familiar barriers such as trust, language, time constraints, childcare, and transportation. Developing a process that eliminates or at least reduces these and other barriers may require going beyond the minimum requirement of 3 meetings. The other reason to consider going beyond the minimum requirement concerns the types of opportunities you'll want to provide residents to give you useful information. You should follow the Fair Maps Act, which is a piece of legislation that passed in 2019 that lays out guidelines for local redistricting. And in that legislation, so you should follow it with respect to what it outlines for structuring your public meetings. And how many meetings you have to hear from residents after drafting maps should depend on how many drafts you develop. And that may mean going beyond 3 meetings. The second structural factor concerns timing and location of participation opportunities. So as I mentioned, the timing and location of those opportunities of participation opportunities tend to be common barriers for participation for certain populations. And because of this, you all should consider prioritizing weekday evenings and weekends for scheduling all of your meetings. This is something that the Fair Maps Act, the Fair Maps Act actually calls for at least 1 meeting to be held outside of regular business hours. So that is Saturday or Sunday or after 6 p.m. on a weekday. I encourage you to consider all of your meetings outside of regular business hours to just increase the opportunities for community residents to be able to participate. Beyond timing, you want to be mindful of location, and as things open up, the possibilities for in-person meetings are going to become more and more prevalent, and you'll want to focus in on locations that are welcoming, comfortable, and accessible. And some things you want to consider are identifying locations that are ADA compliant, in ones that are in close proximity to public transit, ones that are not associated with law enforcement. Consider, even if you have them in person, also live streaming those meetings so that there's access for people who can't attend. Obviously, given the pandemic, you'll want to ensure that there are venues that allow for physical distancing for both your safety and the safety of folks who are showing up, and ensure that that ample hand sanitizer and masks are available. All right, the last 2 structural factors I'll mention concern how you communicate with the public. The first is about how you communicate with the public about meetings, and the second concerns how you communicate with the public at meetings. So about meetings and then at meetings. With respect to how you communicate about meetings, you should provide more information on your website. Just want to start with that. There's not much information for the public on San Jose's redistricting website. It's standard to usually have info about the commission and who the commissioners are, general information on opportunities to get involved and how people can actually get involved, as well as information about places or actually access for people to subscribe specifically for updates from the commission. So that's usually available. Those are things that appear to be absent on your website. And so strongly encourage you to add more information for the public. I also encourage you to post agendas well in advance and with clear information about topics. So when seeking COI testimony, consider posting weeks in advance, not just days, and clearly state what will be covered. Also clearly state how long people will have to provide public comment or comment on their community of interest. Your April and May agendas indicate time for public comment, and those agendas provide some instructions about how to provide public comment, but they don't clarify how long a person has or will have to speak. They simply say, when called, please limit your remarks to the time allotted. By contrast, I saw an agenda for the Clean Energy Community Advisory Commission. And that agenda states that people providing comment are usually given 2 minutes, and that people using a translator will be given twice the amount of time allotted when they need a translator. Your agenda should follow that example in terms of clarity. It will certainly help community members prepare their remarks. When you know how much time you have, you can be better at preparing your remarks. So giving the public that information in advance will be very helpful. And it'll also help you maximize your time. You should also develop and share a participation guide. The first state commission developed a participation guide and posted it on their website. I recommend that you do the same and frequently share or direct people to that guide when you post agendas. So it should be accessible on your website. And then when you're posting agendas, you can have a link to it or have some way to direct people to that guide. You also want to ensure that your materials are accessible. Based on your website, it looks as though all materials are in English and PDF format. And please understand that that limits access for certain people, namely people with limited or no English proficiency, as well as people with visual impairments. With respect to how you communicate at meetings, you're gonna wanna make sure you use plain language and avoid jargon to the extent that you can. I mean, we are talking about redistricting. There is some technical language and language that's unique to redistricting, but as much as possible, try to use plain language. And if you can, try to translate that technical language into plain language. Also use interpreter services. You'll want to make sure, again, this is about making this process accessible to as many residents as possible. Again, you have a sizable portion of the population that speaks in a language other than English at home. So you should strongly consider making interpreter services accessible and accessible to community residents. You also want to consider providing an adequate amount of time for public comment. If your outreach is effective, then you should have robust participation in your process and at your meetings. And it will likely be difficult for community members to effectively talk about their communities in 2 minutes or less. I saw that tonight for public comment, people are being offered 2 minutes, and again, referencing the agenda from the advisory commission, the standard seems to be 2 minutes. Just keep in mind that 2 minutes may be inadequate for people to give you the kind of information that you need about their communities of interest. You'll also want to consider providing more time if an interpreter is needed. So again, based on the clean energy agenda, it seems like the standard policy is to provide residents using a translator twice the amount of time allotted for public comment. So, again, if your outreach is effective, you should have robust participation, and community residents with translation needs may find it challenging to effectively talk about their communities in, say, 4 minutes, assuming 2 minutes is the standard, right? So it's just keeping in mind and doing some deep thinking about what you think the amount of time, what's a reasonable amount of time to get the kind of information that you need. All right. The next issue where the equitable access principle should apply concerns resources. And this is about what tools you make available for people to articulate their community of interest. Earlier, I mentioned that Advancement Project California provided community organizations and residents data and mapping support during the 2011 redistricting cycle. We developed a publicly accessible online mapping tool that allowed community residents to draw their maps for submission in redistricting processes, mainly at the state level, but also at the local level. At the time, such platforms, these types of platforms were rare. Since then, and fortunately, we've seen a proliferation of publicly accessible tools. And it's my understanding that you'll be using one of these tools, which is Districtor, and that's great. To be successful though, you'll have to make sure that residents actually know. They have to know about the tool and they have to know how to use it. So you'll need to think about how you actually encourage residents to use it and how you educate them about using it. So to be clear though, although you'll have this tool, you should and you should encourage residents to use it. You should not disregard maps in other forms or forbid people from submitting maps in other forms. Again, you want to gather as much information as you can. This mapping tool is one form and it streamlines it, but you shouldn't exclude other forms of submission. So undoubtedly, maps will help you visualize the geographic boundaries that make up communities of interest, but you should also receive verbal and written information about those communities. And again, I think this is something that Cynthia and Carlos both touched on. You want to, yeah, there's the maps, but you want to receive information in other forms. To facilitate participation, you should develop worksheets. Worksheets in multiple formats. So, for example, online, PDF, etc. And there are various examples of these. There's one, I have one example on your screen, but there are others. And you should allow multiple forms of submission of both the worksheets and the maps. So your information sources will be maps and worksheets and then what you've recorded in public comment. And you should, when it comes to the worksheets and the maps, and what I'm saying here is allow multiple forms of submission. So that means in person, via email, traditional mail, and fax. The last issue I'll talk about where you should apply the equitable access principle concerns outreach. To generate robust outreach from residents, you should follow the approach that the state took on census outreach, and this is something that Cynthia mentioned. And you should strive for surround sound messaging with messages tailored to those populations that are less likely to participate. And that's what the state did. Their outreach effort was really focused on reaching what are known as hard to count populations. The Census Bureau was already going to do an outreach campaign, and that type of campaign is going to reach segments of the population that are already likely to participate. What was needed was a campaign that was going to reach those segments of the population less likely to participate. And so that's something for you to think about, is think about what are those groups that, again, are likely to face barriers, are less likely to participate. How do we reach them? So, again, you'll want surround sound messaging, and you'll want to have tailored messages to specific groups. And how you deliver those messages and who delivers those messages will be critical to reaching those populations. When it comes to how, you should consider a wide range of tactics. And those tactics are on your screen. They include traditional media, social media, text messages, phone messages, announcements at public meetings, emails, flyers, door-to-door outreach if possible, car caravans if possible. And those are some things that we saw during the census outreach. Similarly, when it comes to who, consider a wide range of messengers, and that includes ethnic media, social media influencers, government departments, schools, and community-based organizations. And I think that's also something that came up earlier during the panel. So again, surround sound messaging, and being very mindful about the wide range of tactics and messengers that you should be using. Again, the census outreach campaign is an example where an emphasis was placed on trusted messengers And CBOs played a key role across the state. And I know right there in San Jose, CBOs played a key role. Advancement Project California was part of the We Count LA census campaign, which was a countywide campaign to conduct coordinated CBO outreach to residents that face barriers to census participation. And there was a similar effort in San Jose. Those organizations include the ones that you see on your screen, the African American Community Services Agency, CARE California, Jakara Movement, Working Partnerships, et cetera. You should tap into this network. And again, this was something that was mentioned earlier. You don't need to recreate the wheel. You have infrastructure, tap into that existing infrastructure. See this infrastructure and this network as a resource for reaching those populations that are less likely to participate. You should also see this network and this infrastructure as a resource for getting more in-depth knowledge about the issues I've spoken about tonight. These groups will have the best on-the-ground understanding of the participation barriers your city faces and how to best apply the equitable access principle in your context. So you shouldn't hesitate to invite them to provide you with their insights. By taking that approach, you'll develop the most fair and inclusive process for residents to participate in redistricting and give yourselves the best chance for developing mapping recommendations that respect communities of interest. Thank you for your time, and I hope you found this information useful.
Super useful. Thank you so much. Let's see if we have any commissioner questions. I would love to, I have a question for you, Doctor. Are there any good surveys or questionnaires that we could distribute through, like, council member emails? They have like thousands and thousands of constituents on their list.
Surveys that get at the type of the redistricting information? Yes. So again, I'll reference the state level commission that Connie was on. One of the things they did well was thought very deeply about engagement, and that was a core part of the work that they did. And they have worksheets. Again, there are other worksheets, and I'm happy to share some examples after this. But I would direct you to their example. They had it was a one sheet, and it was easy. It used plain language. It was direct. And well, Connie can speak to you about how well it worked, but it was available, and like I said, it was in plain language. It was short. It didn't require a lot of time. It got right to the heart of the matter, right to the heart of the type of information that the commission needed.
Could I say something? One of the things that I'm concerned about, because I was a board member for 16 years, and what helped us with our families, especially our Spanish-speaking and undocumented families, is that they felt safe in schools. That was where they felt the safest. And so we used our schools, our junior highs where they lived, as a place where they could come together and receive information. I'm really concerned about the virtual approach because they don't have the sophistication, nor do they have the Wi-Fi to do that. So that's really something that I'm really worried about, that we really need to do some in person for them, and not really rely fully on the virtual, because they really have a hard time with that. They just don't have the facility, nor do they have the Wi-Fi band in their homes. We've got 3 or 4 families living in one house. So it's not, when I see people who use, like myself, that's something for me comes naturally because I've been using it for a long time. But for them, they're comfortable with their smartphones, but they use that for limited things, not for the sophistication that we have. So that's the thing that I would like to bring forward, that when we deal with our families that are non-speaking, not English speaking or are undocumented, to find places where they feel safe and that they will come out, because I know they will come out if the area that they know is familiar and safe.
So I know that the city clerk is going to be talking about just a rough outline of an outreach plan next. And it includes in-person meetings in every district. So we will get to that. But I see that our city attorney's office rep wants to say something.
Yes, hi. You actually segued nicely into what I was going to add about the comment in the presentation about meetings. The resolution that the council passed to establish the redistricting commission does require at least one meeting in each council district to the extent practicable and consistent with public health orders. So as things open up, we may be able to do that. So I just wanted to clarify that point. And then also in terms of outreach, the council imposed a similar rule that the state's independent redistricting commission has with respect to not communicating about redistricting matters, the substantive matters, with anybody from the public outside of a public meeting. So in terms of outreach, if it's informative about what, where meetings will be, the type of tools that are available and things like that, but I want to remind all the commissioners about the particular rule that the council has put in place on all of you.
All right, thanks. Jonathan, so you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I want to thank you, Doctor, for your very interesting presentation. You talked a bit about the average of like 2 minutes that the public usually gets to speak, and I think we did that here. I know for myself, I get kind of flustered if I only have like 2 minutes to just get all the information I want, even in school. Do you have experience with like a usually good amount of time for the regular folk to give those kinds of information at these kind of public meetings that still gives a decent amount of time for other people to engage, so we're not asking folk to stay until like 10 at night to get everyone's thoughts in?
So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. I think it much depends on context, but I would encourage thinking closer to the 3 to 5 minute range somewhere. I'm not saying to think of 5 minutes as the cutoff, but I'm encouraging you to think closer to that range than 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
And again, Connie might be helpful here. I think Connie, you all gave 3 minutes.
Mm-hmm. We did give 3 minutes. The thing I would, maybe add to that as well is that you will, because of, I know personally how dynamic of a community that you have in San Jose, and with a really robust civic infrastructure, nonprofit infrastructure, you name it. And so one thing that we did at the state level is that we had some hearings that we specifically designated were for larger stakeholder groups to give presentations. And so the average person could come and do their 3 minutes, but we knew that particularly for underrepresented communities, but even for, trade associations, like there were some economic associations, other types of entities who had a point of view and were representing a much larger subset of the population. Some of them were membership organizations. And so we actually gave them 20 minutes to present. And in many cases, they presented materials to the commission ahead of time that might have included a report, or it might have included a letter. And then they would kind of explain their point of view in a bit more detail. And so that's something that you might think about in San Jose, just given the community there. Maybe you have, and it may not even be 20 minutes, it might be 10 minutes, but something where entities that are able to aggregate a lot of really great testimony in a way that helps make your job easier is one thing to think about. And in our case too, our budget was really modest. Now we had a much bigger geography, but because we were largely working with donated spaces, we couldn't always guarantee how long we would have a physical space available. Now, if you're doing a combination of some meetings that are going to be online, you may have more flexibility, because at the end of the day, you control the Zoom line. And, if people are willing to hang, you could leave it open longer. But in the beginning, we had some sessions that would go hours and hours, and we were inclined to stay until everyone had said their piece. But then we realized when we went on to the next meeting, that venue was kicking us out early. And so people who had come late thinking that they were going to get a chance to present, they actually got cut off early. So really knowing as you're going ahead, like what are the logistics, opportunities, and constraints, and just making sure that you're really fair and clear around what people should expect when they show up. Because the last thing you want to do is actually do the great work of the education and getting people excited about redistricting, and then to find out that they actually don't have time to speak. And that can be really deflating, not just in that moment, but also in terms of one's, just civic engagement trajectory over time.
Mr. Vaughn? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
I was just going to add, this is also why you'll want to really do what you can to uplift various ways for people to submit information. Public comment is one way, and there are people who are going to be eager to do that. There are some people who aren't going to, but they still may want to share their information. And so just as much as possible, and at all the points that you can, reinforcing that there are multiple ways for people to get information to you.
And having that readily accessible on the website would be useful. Mr. Vani, you wanted to?
No, sorry, I'll
Okay.
put my hand down.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Dahlberg, for the presentation. I actually have a few questions. First, on the participation guide, is there an existing resource that we have access to and perhaps I'm completely unaware of, or something that you could point us to, perhaps?
Yes, again, the last state, last California Commission had information that was readily available to the public, easily accessible for them, and provided guidance to the public on that. I don't know if redistricting partners, Connie, do they have?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So redistricting partners will also be able to provide resources like a template that you could use. You could certainly, the commission at the state level now has a very similar form where it's almost like a fill in the blank. It provides a series of prompts to be able to answer the questions in a way that they have both the component of what do these communities of interest share and how are they geographically connected, or what are the boundaries of it? Chris, do you want to share anything along those lines?
Yeah, it was funny. The Burlingame Community of Interest form is the one we actually provided to them. So it'll be a similar COI form that we can provide to the city of San Jose. Of course, it'll be branded very differently, right? But the same information would be included in it. We also really recommend that cities and all jurisdictions have an online fillable form on their website so that there's multiple ways, like Dr. Dobard went through in his great presentation, to submit information. The other option that we're using for community of interest testimony really is something we call a placemat. And it's old school pen and paper submissions for the public who don't want to do anything virtually, and can trace either a community of interest or sketch out a district plan. So that's something else that we'll be developing for you as we move forward into public outreach hearings.
Okay, thanks. And my second question is on the outreach, you obviously posted a number of means. Do you have any opinion or data, maybe at the top 2 or 3 most effective means of outreach to access the populations that you identified? Because it seems to me that, for example, the list of going to whoever's on your constituent list in your district, you're going to have people on there that are active, have the means, ability, education to get onto a list like that, and not those that don't. So while that's a good point, it seems like that may not be sufficient.
Yes. So what we know, at least based on studies around get out the vote, we know that there's no substitute for in-person outreach. There's really nothing that replaces the return on your investment there. I mean, the likelihood of getting someone to actually act from having someone in person speak with them is higher when it comes to in person than really any other form of outreach. That said, we also know through focus groups that we've done and surveys that we've done that there are other forms of reaching folks that people find acceptable and prefer like text messaging or emails. Those are good, effective ways of reaching people. There's just been that question of, does that get them to act? So if you're trying to get them to do something, you can notify them, but if you're using that to get them to act, that's a bit different. And that's where I'm saying that in person is more effective in not just notifying, but getting someone to act than really any other form of participation. So if you're able to partner with those trusted messengers and find community residents that are trusted by others in the community to speak on your behalf and encourage people to participate, that's going to be the most effective way. You absolutely should still use these other forms, especially if you're just notifying. But when it comes to really urging people or encouraging them to act or participate, you should strongly look at partnering with community organizations and other trusted messengers.
Yeah, and I'll just expand when you, in terms of community organizations, you know, for some of us that may mean like the Catholic Charities example that we heard earlier. You know, one of you spoke about the schools, and that is also a really critical place where a lot of different supports and services are provided. Churches can also be a really critical place where, you know, I mean, talk about trusted messenger for people who are in various faith communities. That is a place where they get a lot of their kind of information and contacts. And then just given the particular demographics in San Jose, also, you know, thinking about the ethnic media channels that you have, particularly for recent immigrant populations, where you may have information and resources that are being distributed in people's native languages. And so being able to just, you know, that mindset of where are people already getting their information, who do they already trust, and how do we partner and embed this information about redistricting into that channel versus thinking that you're going to kind of create or leverage your own redistricting channel and then everyone's going to come to that. You certainly need, just for purposes of the public process and being an entity that is part of government, you need to have your own channel as well. But it is a very particular audience that's going to be tracking that channel versus going to the places they would normally go.
Linka?
I just had one more question, if you didn't mind.
Sure.
And that was on the California Election Code on Section 21.621, the shared social or economic interest. You give a few examples, but I just want to make sure that I'm kind of clear in my mind as to what exactly the term economic interest means, and maybe it belies a definition, but it would be helpful to have a little bit more guidance in particular on that component.
Yeah. So unfortunately, state law doesn't provide greater guidance on that. But as I mentioned in my examples, it might be, you know, there are people who share particular commerce practices. Like, you know, people live in a particular place and they tend to shop at similar shopping centers. Or it might be that, as I mentioned also, that there's a community there are folks who lack access to certain resources and opportunities. So there might be particular communities where unemployment rates might be high. And that's a way of thinking about economic interests. So those are a couple examples, but unfortunately there's not further clarity in the law, which is, you know, kind of a blessing and a curse.
I'll just add in an example, thinking of it also from an industry perspective. You know, what are the main economic drivers in the different parts of your community in San Jose? And you know, I think of some of the testimony we heard when we were in Northern California, in some of the areas that are big grape growing and winery regions. And so we were hearing testimony around how the growers and the distributors had been split up in previous rounds of districts, and it had made it really challenging when they were dealing with environmental issues that actually impacted the whole industry, and, you know, whether it was water access, et cetera. And so you might think about the high-tech industry that you have there and sort of how that's clustered, or, it might come up in terms of industrial areas that you have in the city that have a particular set of needs around land use planning and that type of a thing. So it can be kind of individual economic interests that bind together, and it can also be sort of thinking of it from a sectoral perspective or an industry.
Thank you very much.
Linka.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm actually building upon what Connie had mentioned regarding ethnic media. And I wanted to hear from the doctor as far as with traditional media strategies, because I feel like we're already behind the 8 ball as far as with educating the community about what redistricting is, and perhaps any suggestions you have for how we can better partner with the media to get the word out as far as what redistricting is and what they can expect, and how the public and especially those underrepresented communities can get involved.
Well, I would certainly start by understanding what are the, and Connie mentioned this a little earlier, what are the ethnic media outlets that have real reach? And so identifying them and seeing what you can do to get them to start uplifting the work that you all are doing, to at least first start notifying residents about this. And then if there are other more general media outlets, I would say work with them as well. But again, taking this approach of putting equitable access first, I really would focus on those ethnic media outlets, and figure out if there are some with real reach.
And this may be a question for you to explore with the city staff, and getting a sense of what connections they have that could be leveraged. I know in our case, we did have some modest communication support on the state level commission, but those relationships with ethnic media were actually not part of what came with that. And so we as individual commissioners worked our own personal networks a lot, and who do you know who knows somebody else, and just having a shared set of pitch materials that has a really clear, because there are reporters who may be following a beat that already touches on political issues. They may know what redistricting is, but by the time you get to ethnic media, oftentimes there's not as much of a specialization of somebody who specifically does that. And so, Commissioner Dye, who we heard from earlier, she had this way of, what this audience is going to care about is, are my kids going to get a good education to be able to get into a good school? So figuring out for the different ethnic communities that you're wanting to have greater visibility in, how does this connect to that thing that they care about in a very authentic way, and making sure that that's part of the framing also that you provide as you're reaching out to ethnic media, not to assume, that others will be as excited and clear about how redistricting drives so many other aspects of our community life as now you are also knowledgeable about.
And I'll add, given that we're talking about media, also think about social media personalities that may have reach in San Jose. That was also something that that was part of the census campaign. There were partnerships with particular social media influencers to have them talk about the census. And so that's something that you should consider if you know that there's a YouTube personality or some personality with real reach in San Jose, particularly in those communities less likely to participate. Consider partnering with them.
That's great. Okay, Freddie, I see your hand up.
Yes, hello.
Hey there.
Just a comment. I don't know if we mentioned it or not, but when it comes to major corporations within our valley, they mostly have community liaison officers who more or less participate vigorously with grassroots organizations within their own family itself, their businesses. So I think that's another source that we should tap into, because as you know, a lot of our major corporations here in the Valley, you're talking about thousands of employees. So with that, that's just another um, opportunity for us to get the word out about what we're trying to accomplish.
Thank you so much. You know, that's actually a great segue to the next item, which I want to make sure we get to because the city clerk would like our feedback on a draft outreach plan. So if there are no further questions for Dr. Dobard, we will transition to that. And let me open it up once more for public comment, given that we had a second item in this agenda item. If there's anyone in the public.
There's no hands up.
Okay, great. Connie, any other final thoughts before we, oh, Ramon?
Yes, can you hear me?
Not well.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm having connectivity problems, so I can listen to the meeting. I just don't appear on the screen.
Okay, yeah, we can hear you better now.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, thank you. I'm glad you're back.
No, I'll just close by thanking Dr. Dobard. Really appreciate it. I mean, it's, you know, the organizations like Advancement Project that do the hard work of really getting communities involved and watchdogging the process. I think even for the best of intentions, you know, those of us who are in roles as public service, there's so much that we're trying to track and hold that there's times where we just miss opportunities or don't think of certain things. And so it's always really helpful to hear from independent perspectives from people who are watching the process, even something as simple as, hey, Dr. Dobard had trouble finding information about the commission on the website. That, you know, that's a very simple thing that can be addressed well in advance of the census information coming. So I always learn so much from these presentations. Thank you, Dr. Dobard, and look forward to the next training module. The next month, we will be doing a primer around redistricting law, around federal redistricting law, state level redistricting law. So you really have a firm foundation upon which to move forward. So thank you so much for your engagement this evening.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay. Well, we look forward to seeing you both again. So moving on to item 6, old business. We have no old business agenda. So we'll move on to item 7, which are reports and information. And the first would be from me. I have no report or information to share. So I'll hand it over to our city clerk.
Hi.
Hello.
What I wanted to do today was sort of scratch the itch and get your feedback on the program for community input. So I'm going to go ahead and share the attachment that was published. So in May, we've already got our, you know, you did your role of the commission presentation.
Tony, can you make that full screen or presentation mode?
Yeah, well, it's a PDF. It's
so you can get rid of the thing on the left.
Yeah, I'm looking to see. This is a different view. Okay. Not my, there it is. It's not my regular Adobe. It's like the Adobe Reader.
Thank you.
Let's see if there, because I can always scroll. So today is just the overview of the Redistricting Commission's schedule and outreach plan. And I would also like you to, if you don't have anything to tell me today, to spend the next month thinking about this outreach plan and give me feedback on what you think we should add and what it should look like. So in June, you're going to have a legal review with redistricting partners. There'll be another presentation like you have had today, talking about the law aspect of it. And then we're going to launch our community survey. I got a community survey from redistricting partners. The plan will be to, and I'll send that out to you after this meeting so you guys can sort of have a preview of the survey before we launch it. I also just got a website from the state today for their own, the statewide community redistricting survey. And the questions are very, very similar to what we're looking at. The plan was to translate those surveys into all of our languages, English, Spanish, Vietnamese, Tagalog, Chinese, post those on our website and send the links to our website to all of the council members to include in their newsletters in June, so we can gather these surveys in late June and July.
And let me interrupt just quickly there, if you don't mind, Tony. So for those who don't know, the council members often take July off. So that's why there's a rush to get them that information that they can share in June through their newsletters.
Right. And then we are also working with the Silicon Valley Council of Nonprofits. They're going to host a virtual event with their nonprofits on how to reach the community we serve. And Megan, I think, knows the date off the top of her head, but it's June, I think June 10th.
Something like that. And for those who don't know, the Silicon Valley Council of Nonprofits, they are the umbrella organization for the nonprofits in our valley. They have hundreds of members. They reach thousands of individuals, and they actually approached us. They want to be an outreach partner for us as well. And all the organizations basically that Dr. Dobard mentioned earlier are members of the Council of Nonprofits.
Just wanted to chime in. Yes, it's June 10th at noon.
I knew it. I'm very proud of myself for remembering June 10th. But it's a lunchtime meeting, so the nonprofits can do this during their lunchtime. Come and hear about it. We can give them links to the survey that they can then distribute as well. We're planning on, I've already started the translation of key documents to put onto the redistricting website. You know, that takes time, so we've started that as well. And then in July, the council will be dark, but we're still going to have a redistricting commission meeting. We're going to do a mock mapping software review. Now, I already kind of played around with the mapping software. It's super cool. It's very easy to use. And so we're going to show you guys, do a demo of the software and how you can use it and how the public will use it, because the public will also use it. And then we'll have further discussion with, we'll have the dates of all of our communities of interest public hearings. I have a meeting with PRNS tomorrow. I'd have better dates for you. I'm meeting with PRNS tomorrow to make sure we can actually go out and have in-person meetings in the districts.
And let me translate Parks, Recreation, and Neighborhood Services
Yes,
Department
sorry.
of the city.
Right, they manage the community centers. So I'm meeting with them tomorrow to discuss that. So we'll have something, you know, hopefully by the June meeting, I'll have the dates set out for the August and September communities of interest. We're in one way, I feel like we're rushing. In another way, I feel like we're taking it really, really slow. We want to make sure we have this plan in place. And I wanted you guys to know that we're working on the plan, and we'll have as much of it as I can done for June for you to review, but we'll also go over it in July, and we'll talk about those public hearings, because the public hearings, we're asking that you are present for your district's public hearing. So you can help lead it, and redistricting partners will be present as well. This is something that they do. They talked about, they'll have paper maps of each district that people can draw, like their communities of interest, to say, like, we want this neighborhood kept together. Like Cynthia was talking about the Little Saigon neighborhood, how the state wanted to keep that together. So that's one community of interest. And of course, you've been hearing about those all night tonight. So that's what these hearings will be for, so people can let us know. And the redistricting partners will take all of that data and help us create district lines. And then October through December.
Before you move on, so the city is definitely planning to have translation services at each of these meetings, and have it be a hybrid where folks who want to attend in person can do so, and but they don't have to. They can also view remotely.
That's true. I actually just submitted my budget request for the next fiscal year to have translation in all languages, including ASL, at all of those public hearings. If I don't get approved for the full amount, we'll be more strategic, making sure that we have them in the neighborhoods that need them, and let people know, if you need ASL, you ask me, and we'll make sure they're there. So we'll
American Sign Language.
Yes, American Sign Language. Sorry. I'm so used to acronyms. I appreciate you calling me on that. So yeah, we're planning on full translations in all of the languages, not just Spanish and Vietnamese. full interpretation, as much as that, like I said, I put in the full amount. So we'll see what budget comes back and see if they counter offer me. But we are planning to have that. And then we'll receive the census data probably in October. So in October is when you guys will really start drawing district lines and getting to play with the data. But we're doing as much as we can before we get the data. So once we get it, you're going to be ready to go. And the community will at least feel heard by the time we have the data.
So let me just say that this is not any final plan. This also, I think, Tony, really needs to be looked at again, considering the amazing information we heard tonight. And there's a lot more that we should consider. And definitely brought this to the commission so that we could hear feedback and ideas. And we heard a lot of them about churches and ethnic media and schools and others. So let's hear it. City Attorney Bonnie, did you want to speak now before I go to our commissioner? Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate too, following on that, this will need to be revisited. So just from a legal standpoint, the charter was amended last election to allow the council to establish its own date in the event that the census data is late. So the way it's supposed to go is all of this was supposed to be done in October, and that assumes that all the data would be received timely in April. Well, that didn't happen. So the council can establish its own deadline. The resolution that was passed establishing this commission gave you 120 days from the date that the census data was received. That date was pegged from a time when we thought that the data was going to be received in July, and now it's much later. So that, but the point being is that all of this needs to remain flexible, and hopefully the state will come through and will provide a little additional time for cities to adopt final maps. And we'll need to work with our registrar of voters to see what deadline they have internally so that these maps can be in place for the 2022 election. So I just wanted to set that out for everybody, that they know that the ultimate deadlines to get this all done are going to be a moving target for us.
Great.
Yeah, the last deadline I got from the ROV was December 15th.
Registrar of voters.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
So it was December 15th was the last deadline we got. So that's why we want to get as many of the community input meetings done before we get the data as possible.
Yeah. Okay, Jonathan or Mark, did you want to say one more thing?
Yeah, and so that December 15th deadline is what's under the Fair Maps Act. And we're going to be exploring that a little bit further, but just so that the commission knows that the city council under our charter is the one that passes the maps. And under the Fair Maps Act, they have to hold a number of public meetings themselves before they can adopt the map. I believe it's 3. And so we just all have to keep that in mind as well. So I just want to let everybody know that that time frame is going to compress if the state doesn't, if we're not able to get a later day than December 15th.
Got it. Thank you so much. Okay, Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm sorry if y'all mentioned it before and it just went right over my head. But do y'all already know what the mapping software we're going to use is?
We do, but I can't remember the name of it.
It's called
yeah.
Districtor. Districtor. You can actually go, and there's a free site that you can go to look at how it interacts, like Tony was talking about. But we'll also have one that's specifically for you to use and for the public to use, with the map submissions pretty much live on the website. So you can also view public community of interest maps. And when we get to them, when we get the census data sometime in October, you can see the draft lines too.
Awesome. Is that just how it sounds, district with an ER? Is it district with like an R?
It's district with an R.com.
All right. Thank you.
Or no, I think it might be .org. I'm sorry. Yeah,
I'll figure it out one day.
There it is, right there.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
district. Okay.
Districtr.org.
Districtr.org. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, Linka.
Yes, thank you. I have two questions. One is because probably like many of you, I like to plan ahead. What are we looking at as far as in terms of the possibility of in-person meetings come perhaps August or September timeframe for the commission?
I know the City Hall, the current plan is to open August 2nd.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's firm. For the district meetings, we were looking at those being in person on weekends. And so those would be weekends in August and September. So if you know, like I'm out a certain weekend in, I'm definitely gonna be out the second weekend of August, email me and we'll try to work our districts around so you can be present for your district. And if you have to miss, you miss for a district that isn't yours for at least those communities of interest public hearings. So we'll also send that out in an email asking people to let me know.
Okay.
Don't work for them.
Great.
Try to do 2 every weekend. That way we can go through them, like 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon.
Okay, fantastic. And then my other question is about the preliminary census data, because I'm sure like many of you, you've read in the press as far as with San Jose's populations numbers having gone down. And so wanted to see, will we get that information as it comes, or will it just be when all of it is available, it will be shared with the commission?
I don't know the answer to that. Chris might.
So I think, are you referring to the estimated population data that's provided by the American Community Survey?
Right, there was just some data that came out, I believe it was last week, that there was information as far as with, and I can follow up with Tony as well.
No, it'd be great. But I think one thing that we will be providing is a snapshot of the current district lines and how the deviations look under the American Community Survey's estimated population data. So that's one, data point. It's an estimate. So you can't use the ACS to draw lines, of course. We have to wait for the census to come out. But that is something that can help guide the commission and the public to understand kind of where populations have shifted over the years. The one huge asterisk, of course, is we don't know how aligned the estimated population is going to be to the actual 2020 count. So we'll provide you the information, of course. We can talk about it, but we won't really know until the census is out what the real populations are throughout the city.
Okay, and I'm just looking up a news article from the Associated Press from May 8th, as far as that figures released Friday, had followed the previous week's announcement from the US Census Bureau. And so it was kind of talking about California losing a congressional seat.
Oh, that's the reapportionment data.
Okay.
So
okay.
that's the top lines for the total populations for the states was released, and that's how they decided that California lost its 53rd congressional seat and went down to 52. So that's the reallocation basically of congressional districts, and that just provided a total population for the state of California, and we could compare our totals to the other 49 states.
Okay, so I think based on what we heard and based on the budget request that Tony has submitted, our plan will be changing. We also will be bringing to you that survey that other communities are using that Tony is working on getting translated, that would be sent out in June and July through council members, but also to neighborhood associations and through social media and probably through our partners in the nonprofit sector. So a lot to come. We will revisit all of this, but if you have ideas or suggestions, please send them to Tony. I think we would, this is a living document in some ways, and we want to be sure that that she is, has the resources to do an effective job working with all of us. So, Tony, did you have anything more? If not, I'll see if there's public comment on this item. Okay.
No, I don't.
Is there any public comment on this item? Okay. Oh, yes, great.
Hi, this is Blair Beekman. Will there be open forum at the end of this meeting tonight?
Yes, yes, momentarily.
Thank you. I will
Thank
wait
you.
till then.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from our consultant? Nope. Okay, then we will move on to item, is it 8 on the agenda? It is, open forum. This is the time for public comment on items that are not on the agenda. The Brown Act prohibits the commission from discussing any item that is not agendized, but we certainly welcome public feedback. So.
Okay, so Blair Beekman is our first.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. I had other things to do tonight, so I couldn't attend the meeting. I will review the meeting here. Thank you for having it. You're having redistricting questions, I guess. I don't know what. I guess, you know, I come from a place of open public policy ideas for the future of technology, and it's ideas of peace. Actually, it's the ideas of how to use the ideas of democracy and openness and accountability, and create ideas of peace in a local community, and to end. Basically, we're in the era of war with 9/11, and it's how to leave the era of warfare and closed, secretive, democratic practices, basically. And it's really interesting stuff. It's ideas about sustainability and community. And it can very easily address these COVID issues and ask that and describe that the social planning ideas around COVID are kind of a disgrace. I mean, they're good ideas, but at the price of so many people being hurt, it isn't worth it. And yet, I'm part of this effort to practice, you know, sustainability and dialogue and conversation between community and its government for better technology practices. You know, that's important stuff. That is the ideas of sustainability for our future, and it isn't COVID killing a bunch of people and then bringing in a bunch of new technology and saying that we're well. You know, it's having dialogue. It's making sure we don't social plan in harmful terms in the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beekman.
Okay, there's no more public speakers.
Thank you. Okay, item 9 is the meeting schedule and agenda items. So our next regular meeting will be on June 17th at 6 p.m. via Zoom. You saw in Tony's earlier presentation what the agenda currently looks like. Any comment on the schedule or agendas? If not, we are ready to adjourn. Thank you all for staying. Thank you for your engagement. I look forward to seeing you next month, and we are adjourned.